Greetings, gaming citizens. Mike here, and welcome back to another episode of Point of Viewer, a show that is already off to a great start when it comes to scheduling my video upload schedule. I'm trying my best, I promise. When people mention a console, odds are your mind will shift to your favorite first-party title from that system. If I mention the Nintendo Switch, for example, I'm willing to bet either Mario Odyssey or Zelda Breath of the Wild were the first things that popped up in your head. If it wasn't, let me know what game came to mind in the comments down below. Every console has its major first-party offerings, but sometimes a smaller third-party studio may crank out something that flies under the radar, only to gain recognition way later. Astral Chain was such a game that sold well by moving over 1 million copies in 6 months, yet didn't really see much conversation aside from a commemorative tweet from PlatinumGames a week after launch. Astral Chain has since become a hidden gem for the Nintendo Switch, with fans looking back on the game and asking for a sequel because it was so memorable for them. And that's where our journey begins. With this having become a cult classic from the early years of the Switch, my only questions going into this were, did the trailers help this game stand on its own 2 feet? And how well did PlatinumGames demonstrate the unique gameplay style of Astral Chain? Well, let's go back to where it all began and ask the age-old question, did the trailers do this game justice? Let's sit back and watch these trailers from a point of viewer. Our first trailer is the reveal trailer, which premiered in the February 2019 Nintendo Direct. This Direct took place 5 years after the release of Bayonetta 2, while the third game was in development, so PlatinumGames needed an ace up their sleeve to keep their Switch audience excited while they worked on that. Also, remember that Nier Automata was still only on PS4 and PC at the time since it came out in 2017, so Switch fans really didn't have much to experience from PlatinumGames at this point. Getting into the trailer, we start with a cold open that has a helicopter zoom past the camera while the background track sets the intense tone. We briefly pan to the dual protagonists, who are caught off guard by an unknown alien threat. After some quick shots between the protagonist and the mystery evil creature, the characters spring into action by activating some sort of device. This device, when thrown, appears to summon creatures of their own, but before we can figure all that out, the trailer cuts right into gameplay. Here we see the action RPG combat in full force, with the chain apparently connecting the playable character to the creature they summoned moments ago. Through a handful of shots, we see both ranged and melee combat, including the playable character swinging his creature around with a chain. That's certainly one way to fight, I guess. We also briefly see an ability that lets a player paralyze enemies by having the summoned creature run around the enemy. Before you could even analyze that, we jump to a shot where the player activates what looks like a special move to annihilate an enemy. After that, we see the protagonist driving a motorbike out of an explosion, then cutting to what I think is the most intense walking shot in a trailer ever. It's just a couple seconds, but the high-octane music is still going, so it looks like they're slowly walking, but just really intensely. As the footage continues, it swaps between cutscenes and characters walking in the overworld, with the player analyzing objects falling in a cybernetic dog that I want to protect with my life. The trailer continues with switching between characters, gameplay, and cinematics, all while a conversation between characters adds to the dynamic of the world around them. The trailer then reaches a peak with the protagonist fighting a massive monster on the side of a building, with the music ramping up as well to accommodate the spike in intensity. During this, we also see that you can ride the dog that we just saw a moment ago. After seeing the protagonist throw the massive monster back, it cuts to characters that appear to be the main antagonists, especially this woman who pets the monster like an animal, but don't worry, I swear I can fix her. We then get an idea of who was working on this original IP, including character designer Masakazu Katsura, who has worked on projects that, I admit, I have never heard of before, supervisor Hideki Kamiya, who was the GOAT, and director Takehisa Tora, who worked on Nier Automata. During these credits, there's a conversation happening between the protagonists and the antagonists, asking questions like why these monsters were made, which gives us insight into the story about the creation of these monsters and what their intended use was. After seeing one of the monsters break free from the chains, the protagonists hone in and cut down one of the enemies. Promptly after this, it cuts to the game's title reveal and release date. Then, as the cherry on top, we get an ending scene with some kind of dog mascot walking around and throwing trash away like a good citizen. Given the chains he's wearing, I'm assuming this is just a really funny cosmetic option. Our next trailer comes in the form of a story trailer, which premiered at E3 2019. We start with some zooming shots of the cityscape and panning to what looks like a control center for our main protagonists. After seeing the chairman say, "I've been waiting for you," The trailer cuts to a montage of gameplay with the chairman's voice describing how the Earth is under attack. It's in this voiceover that we get a name for the creatures that have shown up in the world, which are chimeras, likely referencing the creatures in Greek mythology. The trailer switches between shots of combat gameplay, as well as a cutscene where the protagonist is pulled into one of the portals that the chimeras emerge from. During this sequence, the voiceover details the core gameplay mechanic of using your chain tool to capture these chimeras and have them fight with you, as demonstrated by this chimera donning a police uniform upon capture.
By neurologically syncing captured chimeras with human operators.
After that, while hearing the voice of the antagonist talk down to the player, we get various shots of how these captured chimera, now known as legions upon capture, are utilized in the game's world outside of combat. Examples of this include seeing invisible platforms and cutting through certain walls. Because this trailer is focused on telling you about the story of the world, this next segment is just more gameplay clips featuring voices of characters talking about the dire situation at hand. The trailer ends with the protagonist saying, "He's still alive. I know he is," implying that during the course of the game, a significant character is lost and believed to be all but gone. My first impression was that the chairman from earlier is the victim of being taken, but that remains to be seen. Okay, hold on. I know I have a policy to not cover launch trailers, overview trailers, or accolades trailers, given their nature of repeating details, but Astral Chain has made some perplexing choices with its marketing that I want to cover. If you look at Nintendo of America's playlist for Astral Chain content on YouTube, you'll see that besides the Treehouse Live gameplay videos and the trailers we covered already, there are 5 different trailers in this playlist. Now, once we look past the aforementioned overview, launch, and accolades trailers, as well as things you might not know video, we are still left with one story trailer that was uploaded 9 days after launch. While I won't do a play-by-play as I normally do with trailers on this show, I will make a few notes that I do find confusing as a viewer. To start, the trailer shows a few high review scores. This isn't that big of a deal, but there is already an accolades trailer which would be uploaded 9 days later, the likes of which is meant to show off said favorable reviews, so in reality, this small detail didn't even need to be here. The trailer then goes into the story about how the chimeras have stolen away people and brought them into their dimension, with the survivors being on this artificial island called the Ark. Apparently, the Earth is slowly being destroyed by the chimeras, and the mission of the protagonist is to stop whoever is letting that happen. During this trailer, we see a repeat of all the combat we've seen before, but this trailer decides to show us that there are stealth segments, a feature that wasn't highlighted before. Also, the protagonist gives some background context into how the world got to this point, saying there used to be a cure for a pandemic that was killing humans, but the government stopped handing it out all of a sudden. Considering this game came out in 2019, I think it's interesting how this game's themes have aged. The trailer also shows off some kind of rebel group, though their affiliation or purpose is not explicitly mentioned. Other than those details, this trailer was essentially more of the same, with there being cinematics and plenty of gameplay footage. My question, though, is why was this trailer released over a week after launch? If you're attempting to promote the story of the game, wouldn't you want that to be all contained in the dedicated story trailer? Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see a benefit to dropping a trailer outlining the story 9 days after the game came out. The other aspect of Astral Chain's marketing push that I want to talk about was the overview trailer. I won't be covering it in depth, but I wanted to point out that they released this trailer on October 4th, which is over a month after the game came out. This trailer, understandably, covers all aspects of the game, including the storyline and the combat, but also goes more into details that I feel should have been covered in something such as the reveal trailer. For one, we're given the knowledge that the Ark was artificially constructed as a means of fighting off the Chimera. It's a small detail, but as a viewer, I would have liked to see that clarified in the original reveal so we can add world-building context. Another detail that was not shown in the reveal trailer was that the weapon the player uses to summon their legion is called a legatus. Again, small detail, but something I feel should have just been thrown in the original reveal. You could just say, you could summon a legion with a legatus. Simple, it's one sentence. One thing that I am surprised wasn't in the initial reveal was that the main character is part of a task force called Neuron. I asked after the first trailer what the police uniform's significance were, even going as far as to correctly speculate that the main character is indeed part of a special task force. But it feels like one of those things that just should have been mentioned as a character trait. Seems like a very basic thing to mention when you're introducing the game. On one hand, good on Platinum for at least providing some intrigue for the viewer to put together that the main character is indeed part of a police task force. But at the same time, why is this detail being relegated to the overview trailer that dropped a month after release? Another thing that I feel is important to talk about prior to a game's release is the gameplay aspect of detective work. The overview trailer highlights how the player questions locals and collects forensic evidence when danger is afoot. This sounds like an integral part of the game, so again, I have to ask why it was relegated to a trailer that came out after launch. Am I out of line here saying these details and gameplay mechanics should have been in the original reveal trailer? My logic is that the people who would be interested in this game would have already bought it by the time this trailer dropped, so there wouldn't be much of a reason to watch this trailer unless you're maybe on the fence about picking the game up. Let me know down in the comments what you think about this whole thing. I'd like to see other people's viewpoints on this, as it will contribute to how I continue this show. For the interest of not repeating the same question over and over, I'll stop there with my critiques of the October overview trailer. With all that said, let's get into how the previous trailers reflect the final product. After reviewing the trailers, I sat down and played a few hours of Astral Chain to get a feel of the gameplay and immerse myself in the game. Since I only have a few hours on record, I want to stress that you should take my thoughts with a grain of salt. If this frustrates you somehow and you want to see a full review of the game, contact your local congressional representative or comment down below. Astral Chain wastes no time throwing you into the action, as upon starting the game, you're greeted with only a brief cutscene of a chimera being pacified by lab equipment, before pivoting to a motorcycle segment where you're shooting multiple chimeras. It's right after this cutscene we see the part from the initial reveal where the main character rides out of an explosion, and this is where we get into the overlap between the trailers and the final product. The trailer, at least to me, suggested that you learn how to use your chain in combat while on the field. I got this impression from the trailer taking place in the same location as the tutorial level, so I naturally figured that I would be learning all the ins and outs right away. Within the first hour, we are shown the ropes of melee and ranged combat as Akira, or whatever you named your character. However, one key difference I noticed was how you're taught to utilize your Astral Chain roll credits. In the final product, you don't exactly learn the kinds of things you could do with the chain in combat until after the tutorial stage. Instead, the game gives you the option to learn such techniques in the training room, but even then, it's optional. Now, I wouldn't call the trailer misleading in that sense, but it is important to point out that this is a good example of how the selection of gameplay and cinematics for showing off a game in trailers can drastically transform the message given to the viewer. Keep in mind, I watched these trailers before playing the game, so from the moment I booted up the game, I already had an expectation in my mind of how I'd be learning the game's core mechanics. Imagine my confusion when I didn't learn how to counter enemy attacks with the use of the chain until after the tutorial level, and in an optional training room to boot. While I did end up choosing to do the training room tutorial on such mechanics, I will say it's definitely a choice that can impact some players' experiences with the game. Especially considering the chain comes in handy in the first actual mission in the game, so learning these kinds of techniques would come in handy beforehand. Outside of this tutorial level critique, the game is as action-packed as the trailers make it out to be, and that's for sure. The combat is very satisfying to pull off, and the variable use of the Legion as an extension of the player creates some neat gameplay mechanics for item collection and movement, even if I was bad at it starting out.
Bruh.
Also, I enjoyed the investigation portion of the missions of the game. Had I not seen this was a thing in the late overview trailer, I think it would have been a nice surprise to encounter, as someone who enjoys games like the Somnium Files. While I'm sure Platinum didn't intend to keep core mechanics like this from people watching the trailers who are interested in buying the game, I still maintain that it should have just been shown off in a trailer that came out before launch. My one gripe with the investigation part, however, is the end of the segment where you put together the information you found. You can see here that I chose the wrong option at least once.
Just wake up or something?
But there wasn't really a penalty for doing so. I feel like from a gameplay perspective, it devalues the interaction that puts the story together. Instead of encouraging critical thinking and expecting the player to have paid attention to the dialogue, it just kinda lets you BS your way to the combat part of the level. Overall, Astral Chain provides a unique take on the action RPG genre, with its combat mechanics involving the chain and use of legions. It's clear that its gameplay resonated with people very well to the point where it paved the way for games like Scarlet Nexus, which I also enjoyed. While I did find myself struggling to get a hold of the combat at times, I still found the game's experience to be very enjoyable, and I still have a positive first impression of Astral Chain. Astral Chain's trailers provide the viewer with an action-packed insight into the game's world. From the get-go, viewers are given the crucial gameplay and story beats, as the trailers waste no time getting to the good stuff. The use of jump cuts shows off the dynamic nature of the combat, demonstrating how there is both intense gameplay as well as room for slower-paced analytical puzzle solving. As mentioned before, I think the game's marketing struggled a bit in the area of choosing what to show off and when features were talked about. Once again, I have to bring up the choice to have an overview trailer premiere a month after launch. Earlier in this video, I noted that certain gameplay mechanics were shown in the overview trailer that were absent from the trailers we talked about in this video. Namely, the detective segments where you get information from locals about the chimeras causing trouble everywhere. While it may sound like I'm complaining about small details that weren't talked about alongside the game's reveal, I still think that Astral Chain's trailers could have benefited from just including these features and details for the sake of showing the scope of the game. Like I said before, I enjoyed these parts of the game from what I played so far, so to see it not be shown off at all in the game's promotional material was just a tad confusing for me. With all that said, I think Astral Chain is still a fantastic game, despite my opinions on how the trailers should have been structured. Clearly, it was able to leave enough of an impact to still remain as a memorable title from the early years of the Nintendo Switch, so clearly the trailers resonated well enough with quite a few people. What do you think of Astral Chain's trailers? If you played the game yourself, did my critiques make any sense, or did I perhaps miss the mark when analyzing the trailers? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. That's going to be it for me. Stay vibing and thriving, everyone, and I will see you in the next one.